The morning sun cast long shadows across the military base as Private Marcus Thompson adjusted his rifle strap and took his position at the main gate. At 22 years old, Marcus had been serving for 3 years, but his youthful appearance often made visitors underestimate his dedication and training. The guard duty rotation was considered routine by most soldiers, but Marcus approached every shift with the same intensity he brought to combat training. The base was buzzing with unusual activity that Tuesday morning. Word had spread that several high-ranking officials would be visiting throughout the week to inspect various departments and review security protocols. Marcus had heard the rumors in the mess hall the night before, but he focused on his duties rather than getting caught up in speculation about which generals or colonels might appear. As he stood at attention, Marcus noticed a black sedan approaching the checkpoint. The vehicle moved with the deliberate pace of official business, and through the tinted windows he could make out the silhouette of someone in uniform. His training kicked in automatically as he prepared to follow standard security procedures for all incoming vehicles. Regardless of who might be inside, the sedan came to a complete stop at the security barrier, and Marcus stepped forward with professional composure. His movements were precise and confident, reflecting months of repetitive training that had become second nature. He had processed hundreds of vehicles during his time on guard duty, from delivery trucks to visiting dignitaries, and he treated each encounter with the same level of attention and respect for protocol. What Marcus didn't know was that the passenger in the back seat had been watching him carefully from the moment the vehicle entered the base perimeter. Senior Colonel Harrison Blake, a decorated officer with 30 years of service, had specifically requested to enter through the main gate rather than the VIP entrance typically used by visiting officials. Colonel Blake believed that the true measure of a military installation's discipline could be observed in its everyday operations, particularly in how junior personnel carried out their basic duties. Colonel Blake had built his reputation on maintaining the highest standards throughout his career. He was known among his peers for his unwavering commitment to military tradition and protocol. Some called him old-fashioned, while others respected his dedication to the principles that had guided the military for generations. His inspection visits were legendary for their thoroughness, and junior officers often spent weeks preparing for his arrival. As the sedan remained stopped at the checkpoint, Colonel Blake observed Marcus through the window. The young private's posture was impeccable, his uniform crisp and properly maintained. But what caught the colonel's attention was something more subtle in Marcus's demeanor. There was a quiet confidence in the way he carried himself, a sense of purpose that went beyond simply following orders. The driver of the sedan, Sergeant Williams, glanced in the rearview mirror and noticed the colonel's intense focus on the guard. Sergeant Williams had been Colonel Blake's driver for 2 years and had learned to recognize the signs when the colonel was forming an assessment of someone. The sergeant knew better than to interrupt these moments of observation, understanding that his superior was always evaluating the quality of soldiers under his command. Marcus completed his initial visual inspection of the vehicle and approached the driver's side window. His steps were measured and professional, neither hurried nor casual. He had no idea that his every movement was being scrutinized by one of the most senior officers on the base. In his mind, this was simply another routine security check, another opportunity to demonstrate the training and discipline that had been instilled in him since basic training. The morning air was crisp, and Marcus could hear the distant sounds of training exercises echoing from other parts of the base. A formation of soldiers jogged past in the distance, their synchronized footsteps creating a rhythmic backdrop to the scene unfolding at the gate. The American flag fluttered in the gentle breeze above the guardhouse, a constant reminder of the values and principles that every soldier had sworn to defend. As Marcus reached the driver's window, he maintained his professional bearing while preparing to request the necessary identification and documentation. He had no way of knowing that this routine encounter would soon become anything but ordinary, or that his response to what was about to unfold would leave a lasting impression on everyone present. The stage was set for a moment that would be remembered and discussed long after the morning shift had ended. Sergeant Williams rolled down the driver's window as Marcus approached, offering a friendly nod that Marcus returned with professional courtesy. The interaction began exactly as hundreds of others had during Marcus's time on guard duty. He requested identification and vehicle documentation while maintaining the alert but respectful demeanor that military protocol demanded. "Good morning, Sergeant," Marcus said clearly, his voice carrying just enough volume to be heard without seeming aggressive. "I'll need to see identification for all passengers and your authorization for base entry." His words were crisp and direct, following the script that had been drilled into him during security training. Sergeant Williams handed over his military identification card, along with the vehicle's entry authorization. Marcus examined both documents carefully, comparing the photo to the driver's face and checking the authorization against his daily briefing sheet. Every step of the process was conducted with the same attention to detail he would give to any vehicle, regardless of its apparent importance. While Marcus reviewed the documentation, Colonel Blake continued his silent observation from the back seat. The colonel noted how the young private's eyes moved systematically across each document, how he took the time to verify information rather than simply waving the vehicle through. This level of thoroughness impressed Blake, who had seen too many guards become complacent in their duties over the years. "Thank you, Sergeant," Marcus said, as he returned the driver's identification. "I'll also need identification from your passenger." This request was standard procedure, but Marcus delivered it with the same professional tone he used for every security check. He had no idea that he was about to interact with one of the most senior officers on the base. Colonel Blake leaned forward slightly, and for the first time, Marcus got a clear view of the man in the back seat. The sight of the colonel's uniform, adorned with numerous ribbons and insignia indicating his high rank, would have intimidated many junior soldiers. But Marcus maintained his composure, recognizing that proper protocol required him to verify the identification of all passengers, regardless of their apparent rank or status. The colonel reached into his jacket and retrieved his identification card, but instead of immediately handing it over, he held it in his hand and looked directly at Marcus. "Private," Colonel Blake said in a voice that carried the authority of 3 decades of military service, "before I provide this identification, I want to see you render a proper salute to a senior officer." The words hung in the air for a moment as Marcus processed what had just been said. This was not part of standard checkpoint procedure, and the request came as a complete surprise. Military protocol was clear about when salutes were required and when they were not, and the current situation fell into a gray area that Marcus had never encountered during his training. Marcus knew that salutes were typically exchanged when soldiers encountered each other in open areas, during formal ceremonies, or when reporting to superior officers in official capacities. However, guards performing security duties at vehicle checkpoints operated under different protocols designed to maintain security while processing traffic efficiently. The physical act of saluting could potentially compromise a guard's readiness to respond to security threats. The young private found himself in an unexpected position. On one hand, he recognized the colonel's senior rank and understood the respect that such a position commanded. On the other hand, his training had taught him to follow established security procedures without deviation, especially when those procedures were designed to maintain the safety and security of the installation. Sergeant Williams shifted uncomfortably in the driver's seat, sensing the tension that had suddenly filled the vehicle. He had witnessed Colonel Blake test soldiers before, but usually in more controlled environments. The sergeant understood that this moment was becoming a test of the young guard's knowledge of military protocol and his ability to think clearly under pressure. Marcus stood silently for several seconds, his mind working through the situation. He could feel the weight of the colonel's expectation, but he also felt the responsibility of his position as a security guard. His training had emphasized the importance of maintaining security protocols, even when faced with pressure from higher-ranking personnel. The morning sun continued to shine down on the scene, and other base personnel went about their daily routines, unaware of the drama unfolding at the main gate. A few soldiers walking nearby glanced over at the stopped vehicle but continued on their way, assuming it was just another routine security check. Colonel Blake waited patiently, his expression giving no indication of what he expected or hoped to see. This was not the first time he had placed a junior soldier in a challenging situation, and he understood that these moments often revealed more about a person's character than months of routine service. The colonel's request had created a test of both military knowledge and personal integrity, and he was curious to see how this young private would respond. Marcus took a deep breath and looked directly at Colonel Blake, his expression remaining respectful but firm. The moment stretched between them as the young private carefully considered his response. He understood that his next words would be crucial, not just for this interaction, but potentially for his military career. "Sir, with all due respect," Marcus began, his voice steady and clear, "current security protocols require me to maintain my position and readiness while conducting vehicle inspections. I am not authorized to deviate from these procedures, even at the request of senior personnel." His words were delivered without arrogance or disrespect, but with the quiet confidence of someone who understood his responsibilities. Colonel Blake's eyebrows raised slightly at this response. It was not what he had expected to hear from a young private facing pressure from a senior officer. Most junior soldiers in similar situations would have either immediately saluted without question or become flustered and uncertain about what to do. Marcus had done neither. "Are you refusing to salute a superior officer, Private?" Colonel Blake asked, his tone remaining measured but carrying an unmistakable edge of authority. The question was designed to increase the pressure on Marcus and test whether he would stand by his initial response or buckle under the weight of potential consequences. Marcus maintained his professional posture as he replied, "No, sir. I am not refusing to salute. I am following the security protocols that govern my current duty assignment. These protocols exist to ensure the safety and security of this installation and all personnel on it. If you would like me to salute, sir, I would be happy to do so after completing the required security procedures." The response demonstrated something that impressed Colonel Blake more than he had anticipated. Marcus was not simply following rules blindly, nor was he being disrespectful or defiant. Instead, he was showing the kind of thoughtful adherence to duty that the military valued most highly. The young private understood the difference between blind obedience and principled service. Sergeant Williams watched this exchange with growing amazement. He had seen Colonel Blake test many soldiers over the years, but he had never witnessed someone handle such pressure with the combination of respect and steadfastness that Marcus was displaying. The sergeant began to understand that this encounter was revealing something special about the young guard. "Private," Colonel Blake continued, "you understand that I have the authority to order you to salute, and that failing to follow a direct order from a superior officer can result in serious disciplinary action." The colonel's voice remained calm, but the implication of his words was clear. He was escalating the pressure to see if Marcus would maintain his position or finally give in to the demands of rank and authority. Marcus nodded respectfully before responding, "Yes, sir, I understand the potential consequences. However, I also understand that security protocols exist for important reasons, and that even senior officers are expected to support those protocols when they serve the greater good of the mission. My duty right now is to ensure the security of this gate and everyone who passes through it." The young private paused briefly before continuing. "If ordered to salute, I will comply immediately, sir. But I believe my current priority should be completing the security check in accordance with established procedures. This ensures that I can verify your identity properly and maintain the readiness necessary to respond to any potential security threats." Colonel Blake leaned back in his seat, processing what he had just heard. Marcus's response demonstrated several qualities that were rare among junior personnel. The private had shown knowledge of regulations, commitment to duty, and the courage to stand by his principles even when facing pressure from a superior officer. Most importantly, he had done all of this while maintaining complete respect for the colonel's rank and authority. What struck the colonel most was that Marcus had not simply cited regulations as an excuse to avoid saluting. Instead, he had demonstrated a genuine understanding of why those regulations existed and how they served the broader mission of military service. This kind of thoughtful approach to duty was exactly what the military needed in its soldiers, especially those who might one day become leaders themselves. The other personnel in the area continued their activities, still unaware of the significant moment unfolding at the checkpoint. A group of new recruits marched past in formation, their young faces serious with concentration as they practiced the fundamentals of military bearing. None of them realized they were witnessing an example of the kind of principled service they were being trained to emulate. Colonel Blake found himself at a crossroads. He could continue to press the issue and insist on the salute, which would likely result in Marcus complying but would undermine the very qualities the colonel had come to admire in the young soldier. Alternatively, He could acknowledge the wisdom of Marcus's position and use this moment as a teaching opportunity for everyone involved. After what felt like an eternity but was actually only a few seconds, Colonel Blake made his decision. A slight smile began to form at the corners of his mouth as he reached into his jacket and pulled out his identification card. "Private Thompson," he said, reading the name from Marcus's uniform. "You are absolutely correct." The words seemed to hang in the air as both Marcus and Sergeant Williams processed what the colonel had just said. Neither had expected this turn of events, and the sudden shift in the colonel's demeanor caught them both off guard. "In 30 years of military service," Colonel Blake continued, "I have encountered far too many soldiers who were quick to abandon their principles when faced with pressure from senior personnel. What you have demonstrated here today is exactly the kind of integrity and commitment to duty that our military needs." The colonel handed his identification card to Marcus. With a gesture of clear respect, Marcus accepted the identification card with steady hands. Though inside he felt a wave of relief mixed with confusion. He had prepared himself for the possibility of disciplinary action, and this positive response from the colonel was unexpected. Still, he maintained his professional demeanor as he examined the identification card with the same careful attention he had given to the driver's documentation. As Marcus reviewed Colonel Blake's credentials, the colonel continued speaking. "You understand something that many senior officers struggle to grasp. Military discipline is not about blind obedience to rank. It is about intelligent adherence to principles that serve a greater purpose. Your security protocols exist to protect this installation and everyone on it. By maintaining those protocols, even when pressured to deviate from them, you have shown that you understand the true meaning of military service." Sergeant Williams felt his respect for both men grow as he witnessed this exchange. He had always admired Colonel Blake's commitment to military excellence, but this moment showed a side of the colonel that was both wise and humble. Similarly, his estimation of the young private had risen dramatically as he watched Marcus handle an extremely difficult situation with grace and principle. Marcus completed his examination of the colonel's identification and returned it with a crisp nod. "Thank you, sir. Your identification has been verified, and you are cleared for entry to the base." His voice carried the same professional tone he used for every security check, but there was also a note of quiet satisfaction in successfully completing his duties according to protocol. "Private Thompson," Colonel Blake said, as he tucked his identification back into his jacket, "I want you to know that your actions today represent the highest standards of military service. You have shown that you understand the difference between following orders and following principles. That distinction is what separates good soldiers from great ones." The colonel paused for a moment before continuing. "I have been testing soldiers for many years, and I can honestly say that very few have impressed me as much as you have today. Your commitment to duty, combined with your ability to think clearly under pressure, suggests that you have the potential for significant advancement in your military career." Marcus felt a mixture of pride and humility as he listened to the colonel's words. He had simply done what he believed was right, following the training and principles that had been instilled in him since joining the military. The idea that his actions might have broader significance was both exciting and slightly overwhelming. However, Colonel Blake added with a more serious tone, "I want to make sure you understand something important. There will be times in your career when you face similar situations, and not every senior officer will respond as I have today. Some may view your adherence to protocol as insubordination or disrespect. In those moments, you must trust in your training and your principles, even if it means facing consequences." The colonel's words carried the weight of experience and wisdom earned through decades of military service. He had seen good soldiers compromise their integrity for the sake of avoiding conflict with superior officers, and he had also seen principled soldiers face unfair treatment for doing what was right. His advice to Marcus came from a genuine desire to help the young private navigate the complexities of military life. "Yes, sir," Marcus replied. "I understand. My instructors taught me that our oath is not to any individual officer, but to the Constitution and the principles it represents. I believe that following proper protocols, even when it is difficult or uncomfortable, is part of honoring that oath." Colonel Blake nodded approvingly at this response. The young private had demonstrated not only good judgment in a specific situation, but also a deeper understanding of what military service meant. This combination of practical wisdom and principled thinking was exactly what the colonel hoped to find in the soldiers serving under his ultimate command. Colonel Blake leaned forward in his seat, his expression becoming more animated as he continued the conversation. "Private Thompson, I want you to understand that what happened here today was indeed a test, but not the kind you might imagine. I was not testing your willingness to salute or your respect for authority. I was testing your commitment to the principles that make our military strong." Marcus listened intently, beginning to understand that this encounter was far more significant than a simple security check. The colonel's words were revealing layers of meaning that had not been apparent during the initial confrontation. "You see," the colonel explained, "I have been visiting military installations across the country for the past 6 months, conducting informal assessments of our personnel. I am particularly interested in how our junior soldiers handle situations that require them to balance respect for authority with adherence to duty. What I have found, unfortunately, is that too many soldiers are quick to abandon their responsibilities when pressured by senior personnel." Sergeant Williams turned slightly in his seat, realizing that he was witnessing something more than just a random encounter. The colonel's inspection tour was apparently more comprehensive and purposeful than he had understood. "Just last month," Colonel Blake continued, "I visited a base where the security guards immediately abandoned their checkpoint procedures when I requested special treatment. They were so eager to please a senior officer that they compromised the very security they were supposed to maintain. That kind of behavior, while well-intentioned, undermines the entire purpose of military discipline." Marcus began to understand the broader context of what had just occurred. His decision to maintain security protocols was not just about following rules. It was about demonstrating the kind of principled thinking that the military needed from its personnel at every level. The military is only as strong as the commitment of its individual members to do what is right. "Even when it is difficult," the colonel said, "officers like myself come and go, but the principles of duty, honor, and integrity must remain constant. Your willingness to prioritize those principles over the temporary comfort of avoiding conflict shows that you understand what real military service means." As the conversation continued, other base personnel began to take notice of the extended interaction at the checkpoint. A few soldiers walking nearby slowed their pace, curious about why a vehicle had been stopped for such an unusually long time. However, none of them were close enough to hear the conversation or understand its significance. Colonel Blake noticed the attention they were attracting and realized that their discussion was becoming more public than he had intended. "Private Thompson," he said, "I would like to continue this conversation, but perhaps this is not the appropriate venue. Would you be available to meet with me in my office later today, after your shift ends?" The invitation surprised Marcus, who had never been asked to meet privately with such a senior officer. "Yes, sir," he replied. "I would be honored to meet with you. My shift ends at 1600 hours. "Excellent," the colonel said. "Report to Building 7, Room 205 at 1630 hours. We have much more to discuss." He then reached into his briefcase and pulled out a business card, handing it to Marcus through the window. "This contains my contact information. If you have any questions or concerns before our meeting, please do not hesitate to call." Marcus accepted the card with appropriate formality, though his mind was racing with questions about what the colonel might want to discuss further. The morning had already been far more eventful than he had anticipated, and now it seemed that the consequences of his actions would extend well beyond his current shift. "Sergeant Williams," Colonel Blake said, turning his attention to the driver, "please make note of Private Thompson's name and unit information. I want to ensure that his immediate supervisors are aware of the exemplary service he has provided today." The colonel's instruction carried the clear implication that Marcus's actions would be documented in a positive manner. Sergeant Williams nodded and made notes in a small notebook he kept for such purposes. He had learned over his years of service that when Colonel Blake took special notice of a soldier, good things usually followed. "Private Thompson," the colonel said, returning his attention to Marcus, "before we proceed through the checkpoint, I want to make one thing clear. When we meet later today, you should feel free to speak openly about your thoughts and experiences. I am interested in your perspective on military service and your observations about how we can better prepare our soldiers for the challenges they will face." The invitation to speak freely with such a senior officer was both exciting and intimidating for Marcus. He understood that this was an unusual opportunity, but he also felt the weight of responsibility that came with it. "Yes, sir," Marcus replied. "I appreciate the opportunity, and will be prepared to share my thoughts honestly." His response demonstrated the same straightforward approach that had impressed the colonel throughout their interaction. As the morning progressed and Marcus completed the final steps of the security check, Colonel Blake prepared to conclude their interaction at the checkpoint. However, before signaling Sergeant Williams to proceed, the colonel had one more important point to make. "Private Thompson," Colonel Blake said, his voice taking on a more formal tone, "I want to ensure that you understand the full significance of what has transpired here today. Your actions have demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership potential that our military desperately needs in its junior personnel." Marcus stood at attention, sensing that the colonel was about to share something important. The weight of the moment was not lost on him, and he prepared to listen carefully to whatever guidance the senior officer was about to provide. "Throughout my career, I have observed that the soldiers who eventually become the most effective leaders are those who learn early to balance respect for authority with commitment to principle," the colonel explained. "You have shown today that you possess both qualities in appropriate measure. This suggests that you have the foundation necessary for significant advancement in your military career." The colonel paused, allowing his words to sink in before continuing. "However, I must caution you that the path ahead will not always be easy. There will be officers who mistake your principled approach for insubordination. There will be situations where doing the right thing will create difficulties for you personally. In those moments, you must remember that true military leadership requires the courage to stand by your convictions, even when it would be easier to compromise." Sergeant Williams listened to this exchange with growing respect for both men. He had seen Colonel Blake mentor many soldiers over the years, but there was something different about this interaction. The colonel seemed to recognize something special in Marcus, and his advice carried the weight of genuine investment in the young soldier's future. "Sir," Marcus said, "I appreciate your confidence in me, and I want you to know that I take your guidance seriously. May I ask what you believe are the most important qualities for a soldier to develop as he advances in his career?" The question pleased Colonel Blake, as it demonstrated that Marcus was thinking beyond the immediate situation and considering his long-term development as a military professional. "That is an excellent question, Private. In my experience, the most successful military leaders are those who combine three essential qualities: technical competence, moral courage, and the ability to inspire others through their example." The colonel elaborated on each point as Marcus listened intently. Technical competence means mastering your assigned duties and continuously seeking to improve your knowledge and skills. Moral courage means doing what is right even when it is difficult or unpopular, and inspiring others means demonstrating through your actions the standards that you expect from those around you. As their conversation continued, Marcus began to understand that his encounter with Colonel Blake was providing him with insights that might normally take years of military service to acquire. The colonel's willingness to share his experience and wisdom was an unexpected gift that Marcus resolved to make the most of. "Private Thompson," the colonel said, "when we meet this afternoon, I want to discuss a specific opportunity that might interest you. There is a leadership development program that I believe would benefit both you and the military. However, I do not want to discuss the details here at the checkpoint. This conversation requires privacy and time for proper consideration." The mention of a leadership development program sent a surge of excitement through Marcus. Though he worked to maintain his professional composure, the possibility that his actions today might lead to new opportunities was both thrilling and sobering. "Thank you, sir," Marcus replied. "I look forward to learning more about this opportunity and discussing how I might best serve the military's needs." His response demonstrated the same balance of enthusiasm and professionalism that had characterized his entire interaction with the colonel. Colonel Blake nodded approvingly, and then reached into his briefcase once more. He pulled out a small notebook and wrote something quickly before tearing out the page and handing it to Marcus. "This is the name and contact information for Captain Sarah Mitchell, who serves as my aide-de-camp. If for any reason you are unable to make our meeting this afternoon, please contact her immediately. She will ensure that we reschedule at the earliest possible opportunity." Marcus accepted the paper and glanced at it briefly before placing it carefully in his uniform pocket, alongside the colonel's business card. The fact that the colonel was providing multiple ways to maintain contact reinforced the seriousness of his interest in continuing their relationship. "I also want you to know," the colonel added, "that regardless of what we discuss this afternoon, your actions today have already been noted in my official report on this installation. Your commitment to duty and your professional bearing under pressure reflect very well on your unit and your leadership. Your immediate supervisors will be receiving positive feedback about your performance." The assurance that his actions would be documented positively was a relief to Marcus, who had initially worried about potential negative consequences from his refusal to immediately salute. Now he understood that his principled approach had actually enhanced his standing rather than damaged it. Colonel Blake straightened in his seat and looked directly at Marcus one final time, before their checkpoint encounter would conclude. "Private Thompson, before we proceed through this gate, I want to leave you with one last thought that I hope you will carry with you throughout your military career." Marcus stood ready to receive whatever final guidance the colonel wished to share, understanding that this moment represented the end of an interaction that had already exceeded his highest expectations for what a routine security check might become. "The military is built on a foundation of trust," the colonel began. "We trust that each soldier will do his duty, regardless of whether anyone is watching. We trust that our personnel will follow their training and their principles, even when faced with pressure to do otherwise. Most importantly, we trust that when the moment comes to choose between what is easy and what is right, our soldiers will choose what is right." The colonel's words resonated deeply with Marcus, who recognized that his actions that morning had indeed been a test of exactly the kind of trust the colonel was describing. Without realizing it, he had proven himself worthy of that trust through his commitment to maintaining security protocols, despite pressure from a senior officer. "What you demonstrated today," Colonel Blake continued, "is that you understand this trust and take it seriously. You showed that you can think clearly under pressure, that you know the difference between blind obedience and principled service, and that you have the courage to stand by your convictions even when it might be uncomfortable to do so. These qualities will serve you well as you advance in your career." Sergeant Williams prepared to put the vehicle in motion, understanding that their business at the checkpoint was nearing its end. However, he found himself hoping that he would have the opportunity to witness the continuation of the relationship between the colonel and the young private. Their interaction had been unlike anything he had observed during his years of service with Colonel Blake. "Sir," Marcus said, "I want to thank you for taking the time to explain the significance of what happened here today. I honestly thought I was just doing my job according to my training, but you have helped me understand that there was much more at stake. I promise you that I will remember this lesson and apply it throughout my career." Colonel Blake smiled warmly at this response. "Private Thompson, the fact that you thought you were simply doing your job is exactly what makes your actions so impressive. The best soldiers are those who consistently do the right thing not because they are seeking recognition or reward, but because it is who they are. Your natural inclination to prioritize duty over convenience suggests that you have the character necessary for significant leadership responsibilities." As the colonel prepared to conclude their interaction, he made one final gesture that would be remembered by everyone present. Instead of simply ordering Sergeant Williams to proceed through the checkpoint, Colonel Blake opened his door and stepped out of the vehicle. Standing in full view of Marcus and any other personnel who might be observing, the colonel came to attention and rendered a crisp, formal salute to the young private. The gesture was unexpected and powerful. Marcus immediately returned the salute with equal precision, his training taking over even as his mind struggled to process the significance of what was happening. A senior colonel with 30 years of service was saluting him, a junior private, in recognition of his principled service and commitment to duty. The salute exchange lasted only a few seconds, but its impact would be felt for much longer. Other soldiers in the area who witnessed the scene understood immediately that something extraordinary had taken place, even if they did not know the full details of what had transpired. Colonel Blake returned to his seat in the vehicle and nodded to Sergeant Williams, who began to drive through the now raised security barrier. As the sedan moved away from the checkpoint, the colonel rolled down his window one last time. "Remember, Private Thompson," he called out, 16:30 hours in Building 7, Room 205. I look forward to our continued conversation." With that, the vehicle proceeded into the base, leaving Marcus standing at his post with a mixture of pride, excitement, and anticipation for what the afternoon might bring. As Marcus resumed his position at the checkpoint, He reflected on the remarkable series of events that had just unfolded. What had begun as a routine morning shift had become a defining moment in his military career. He had learned valuable lessons about leadership, principle, and the true meaning of military service. Most importantly, he had discovered that doing the right thing, even when it was difficult, could lead to opportunities he had never imagined. The story of Private Marcus Thompson's encounter with Colonel Blake would be discussed throughout the base for weeks to come. It became an example of how principled service and commitment to duty could be recognized and rewarded, even in unexpected circumstances. For Marcus, it marked the beginning of a military career that would be defined by the same qualities he had demonstrated that morning at the checkpoint. His response to a senior officer's demand had indeed left everyone speechless, but for reasons that would ultimately advance both his career and the cause of principled military service.